Mysteries and incomprehensible phenomena have always been the source of the imagination of human beings. That's why the stories about wizards and witches can be found in different folklores from all over the world. And Slavic folklore is no different. Let's take a look. Shaman, or in Slovenian Vrach, had one of the most important roles at especially sacrificial rituals. I intentionally used the Slovenian word as using an English word shaman, although they were similar in certain ways, I wouldn't consider the most appropriate terminology. You see, shaman was communicating with the spiritual world and looking for the answers via traveling between the real and invisible world, while Vrach served more as some kind of a priest and a doctor, but more about that later. In addition to Vrachi, rituals were also performed by žreci, another word in Slovenian, as again I couldn't find an appropriate one in English. Žrec was another type of a priest or a gift bringer, if you will. The word is derived from žrtva, which means a sacrifice or a gift. Like Vrachi, žreci played a very important role in an early Slavic society. Their main occupations were gifting the gods, sacrificing, making sure the fire in the sanctuary was always burning, specifying the terms of the rituals, predicting destinies and concluding the marriages. Žreci were part of elite in pre-Christian Slavic society. They had an enormous political influence and often ruled together with prince or in Slavic knes. As described in the old chronicles, they had a long hair that they never cut. At the time of the Christianization of the Slavs, they were the main core of the rebellion against the new religion. Niederle, a Czech archaeologist, anthropologist and ethnographer, believed that before all these roles were established, the ritual role was first performed by the father of the family. Many customs of Slavic people, however, show that this was not necessarily the case. In the tradition of the Slavic peoples, occupations such as prophecy and foresight actually belonged mainly to the women. Of course, this is not only typical for Slavs, as similar things can be found in other cultures as well. Different records from the 10th century show that the Vrach was called Volchv and magic Volžba and Vrhovstvo. Their social role and position wasn't sufficiently clarified, as well as the etymology of their names. However, there is a connection between the Slavs and other European peoples through this word. For an example, Voloch or Valat is an old Slavic word for a Celt. In Finnish, Velho means a wizard, and Voelva is known to Germanic people, meaning a magician or a prophet. Word Vlah can also mean a foreigner in Slavic languages, whether it is the Italian Leyh or other colonized Roman nations Vlachi, such as Illyrians, Thracians and others. Also, for example, an old Slovenian word for people of Wales is Valjani, today pronounced as Valižani. But what was Volchv? Ordinary wizard, priest or vrach? It's hard to answer that question, as written sources are a little bit scarce regarding their function, but from the reports we do know that Volchvi acted as defenders of the old faith and as rebellion leaders against princes and feudalism when Russia adopted Christianity. Even after the adoption of Christianity, all Slavic peoples have long kept magicians, or as they were known on Slovenian soil, Črnošolci. Due to Christianity, they have been associated with impure force and black magic. This is also where the name Črnošolci comes from, as Črno means black. It's very interesting that, for an example, the Russian perceived and considered the wizards of foreigner descent much stronger than the local ones. They have trusted the Finnish, Karelian and Mordvin prophets more than the local ones. However, that is quite typical for many nations, as goes the saying, no one is a prophet in their own land. Now, from the 9th to 11th century, other words start to appear in addition to vrach and vrachanje. I'll give you a few, otherwise this video will be too long. Derived from word char come Slavic words such as charovnik, charodejnik, charodejec, carodej, charecel, which all have the same meaning, a wizard. Other words still occurring today derived from the Slavic verb know are, for an example, vedeti, veštiti, viedun, viedstvo, vieštica, vešča, veščak. From an ancient Slavic verb ba, whose meaning I'll explain in a second, come words bajati, bajiti, bajač, or amongst the West Slavs kuzlec, kuzler, kuzlarnica. Many of these terms have been preserved in Slovene as well, in Brižinski monuments that are, by the way, the oldest known preserved records of Slovene language and the oldest Latin script in any Slavic language, you can find the name Bali, which can still be found as a house name in Slovenia, for an example. In the original Slovene, the word Bali, that also comes from verb ba, meant the advocate, the person whose main occupation was bajanje, or speaking and spreading magic this way, sort of. Proof of that connection can be found as many Slovene words still derive from it. For an example, bajavec, bajarica, or perhaps word fairy tale, or in Slovene basen, that is obviously also derived from it. A lot of records testify that magic or wizardry had an extremely important role in pre-Christian Slavic society, and even after the Slavic people adopted Christianity. Proof of that are a series of church decisions from the 9th to 14th century in which the church persecuted the magicians and their activity. After several centuries of persecution of old magicians with non-Christian practices, the priests took over the main spiritual role. The priests also inherited some of the basic roles that were formerly performed by vraci. In the first place, those roles were prophecy, fortune-telling and sorcery, while healing and love spells still remained a domain of vraci. There are data from which we know that the priests were chosen by the people and that there was a certain hierarchy amongst the priests. Priests also had a great power and reputation, as before them vraci. The power of the priests was often bigger than the tribal elders, or in some cases even bigger or equal to the power of the prince. But whether the people were ruled by the priests, vraci or prince, the old pagan religion was so intertwined in the identity and ideology of the people through customs and traditions that the pagan religion had its own power, and this served as a great weapon in the fight against the foreign conquerors. Interesting information comes from a Persian explorer and geographer from the 10th century, Ibn Rastach, who described the power of the Russian priests with the following words. They have priests, most probably he was referring to vraci, that determine how many women, men or animals the prince must sacrifice, and nobody can disagree with them or disobey their orders. Slavs, much like Scythians, often strangle the victims, may it be human or an animals, as part of a sacrifice. There are many interesting records about different European nations from Ibn Rastach. Just for an example, I'm going to give you a part of his description of a 10th century Novgorod. In his words, when a son is born, a father raises a newborn baby with a sword in his hand. He throws the baby on the ground and says, "I will not leave you any property. You will have what you will provide for yourself with a weapon." The quote obviously shows how hard and cruel a life was back then. But let's get back to the topic. Now, let's conclude this video with some thoughts about early Slavic healers. As I previously mentioned, vraci also had the role of a doctor or a healer, if you'd like, and most so-called magicians at the time did actually. They did not heal only by, creating magic, amulets and saying words, but actually also practice herbal medicine. Main occupation of these wizards at first was actually herbal medicine, only later on they became known as wizards. And this is also where the word kurenitici comes from, which was just another name people used for wizards. Kurenitici comes from the word koren, which in Old Slavic meant a root. Just for an example, in Slovenian today we use the word korenina, so again it didn't change as much. But anyways, this pretty much proves that these so-called wizards were at first just some simple healers, people who were digging around in the forests for roots and herbs, and who were making their healing or poisoning potions from what they found in the nature. For an example, there are records about Northeast Slavic people about how they healed the broken limbs with the help of a tree bark. But not just any tree. As I've mentioned in my previous video, certain trees were perceived as holy in pre-Christian Slavic society, and those holy trees were usually the ones cut down to help the injured person. There were a bunch of different trees and flowers that carried a significant meaning in early Slavic society. One of most known at that time also to other people was Poisonus veratrum album, which is called chimerica in our languages. Slavs most probably used this flower to create the poison with which they then covered arrow tips. From chimerica also comes an old Slavic word chimeri that basically means poison. There's a bunch of different flowers and trees, but again, I'm not going to enlist them all. Beekeeping, for an example, is also very widespread and popular amongst the ancient Slavic people, and In a way it still is. I'm from Slovenia, so I'm going to take a moment here to share an interesting information with you. In Slovenia, 1 out of 20 people is a beekeeper. How crazy is that? So this really proves that this was part of our tradition. But anyways, besides the bees, there's another interesting insect that played its role in an early Slavic society, and that was Margarodes polonicus, or simply put Polish worm, or in Slavic Polski čeru or červjak. And that little insect was formerly used to produce a red dye. From here, in various Slavic languages, the word cerven means red. Of the animal products, it's necessary to mention the animal grease. All the Slavic and Germanic people used it mainly for their hair. Crushed rabbit and boar claws were used by the hunters as a healing powder. Teeth and other bones were used for amulets against diseases. Especially boar fangs were used as amulets against the evil forces and demons by Slavic and other Indo-European peoples. Amulets were worn by everyone, especially little children, so that they were protected from bad luck, disease and essentially even death. Before the Christian persecution of witches, the reputation of these women was very different. As a matter of fact, in Slavic pre-Christian society, witches were well respected. People believed in their power and often turned to them for help in case of illness. Witches also performed a ritual in which they fend off sickness from the newborns and also larger children. In these rituals they spitted, cursed, called the demons and performed various magic. Historian Otto Schrader even stated that although we know various and complex forms of wizardry that have been present from early ages until today, none of them carried such a significance as in the Baltic Slavic countries and especially in ancient Russia. There are hundreds and thousands of sayings towards various injuries and diseases and amulets that prove that in the ancient Slavic society magic truly played a significant role. I'll finish this video with the story or an example of how witches healed the disease. The story comes from the Balkans and it's from 2015 by the way, which also proves that in Slavic world things like this are still present. A father brought his daughter with asthma to the witch. The witch had the little girl lean against the tree. While the girl was touching the tree with her head, the witch was hitting the nail in the tree next to her legs and saying something like this: "As the nail goes into the tree, let the disease go into the nail." Person who shared that story said that the little girl was cured of asthma within a week. Anyways, it's up to you if you believe it or not. If you enjoyed this video, click that thumbs up, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. And if you really don't want to miss any of my uploads, make sure you click that bell icon after you subscribe. I suppose that's all. Thank you for watching, and until the next time.